It was 3 in the morning when my security camera picked her up, my HOA president sneaking across my driveway with a pair of bolt cutters in her hand. She was stealing my EV charging cable. The same woman who owned an $80,000 Tesla. The same woman who'd been on my back for months about my unsightly electrical setup. And now, she was about to learn that a blue-collar electrician knows a thing or two about setting traps. On my phone screen, I watched her slice through $300 worth of copper wire. The metallic tang of cut metal still lingered in the cool night air. Gravel crunched differently under my boots as I walked toward undeniable proof of a felony. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint hum of her Tesla charging in her garage, using my stolen cable. What she didn't realize was that I had been documenting everything. Every instance of harassment, every shady move, every federal crime she was about to commit. At this point, it wasn't about a cable anymore. It was about justice. And she had just handed me the evidence I needed to bring down her entire operation. So let me ask you, what would you do if your neighbor literally stole electricity straight from your driveway? My name's Marcus. 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my little piece of the American dream. After my divorce, let's just say my ex-wife kept the house while I was left with the debt. I needed a clean start, somewhere my 16-year-old daughter, Zoe, could come on weekends without feeling embarrassed about her dad's living situation. I wanted a place with a garage big enough for a proper workshop. Because when you're rebuilding your life, you need room to rebuild everything else, too. Willowbrick Estates seemed perfect on paper. It was built in the 90s, back when HOAs were supposed to be about keeping neighborhoods nice instead of feeding power-hungry egos. During my first walk through, the smell of freshly cut grass carried through the air, and neighbors actually waved like decent people. I bought a modest 3-bedroom house for one main reason, the 2-car garage. I'm an electrical contractor, and I've been crawling through attics and rewiring homes for 22 years. After being laid off from my last company, I struck out on my own. That garage workshop wasn't just a place to tinker, it was my financial lifeline. I drive a 2019 Nissan Leaf. Not exactly the kind of car that turns heads, but it does the job. After years of watching gas prices eat into my budget, switching to electric just made sense. Plus, I had the skills to install my own level 2 charging station, fully permitted, properly inspected, everything by the book. Zoe even helped me test the circuits. Nothing beats the feeling of father-daughter bonding over voltage meters and real-world lessons that no high school physics class ever covers. And that's when Brenda Fitzpatrick entered the picture. Real estate agent, HOA president, and proud owner of the largest house on the corner lot, a sprawling colonial bigger than my last 3 apartments combined. Brenda drove that Tesla Model S I mentioned, the kind of car that pretends to whisper I care about the planet, while screaming I'm better than you at top volume. She treated the neighborhood like Fort Knox, except instead of guarding gold, she was protecting property values from the supposed menace of working-class people. The harassment started 3 months after I moved in. First came the violation notice. My charging station was deemed unsightly. I showed her it was code-compliant and pre-approved by the city. Strike 1 for Queen Brenda. Next, she had my work van ticketed for being a commercial vehicle, even though it was parked in my own driveway. Before long, the rough feel of citation slips became too familiar in my hands as I fought ticket after ticket. Here's the kicker. Brenda publicly opposed adding EV infrastructure at HOA meetings, all while driving the most expensive electric car on the market. She wanted the prestige of going green without the reality of making it accessible. It was like complaining about gas stations while showing off a Ferrari. The hypocrisy was so thick you could slice it with, well, bolt cutters, which, spoiler alert, she actually owned. To Brenda, I was everything she wanted to scrub out of Willowbrick Estates. A blue-collar guy in work boots instead of golf shoes. Someone who repaired things rather than just buying replacements. Someone who earned a living with his hands instead of profiting off people's desperation. From the moment she saw my used Leaf and my beat-up work van, Brenda decided I was patient zero in the so-called property value plague. The night she stole my cable, I caught everything on my security system. First, she checked my windows, like some professional burglar. Then she strutted over to my charging outlet with those bolt cutters, as casually as if she were trimming her roses. One quick snap, and the cable was severed right at the outlet. She walked off with a full 25-foot cord like it was her rightful property. The audacity was unreal. She didn't even try to hide it, just marched straight to her garage carrying stolen evidence in plain sight. That's when it hit me. In her mind, blue-collar meant dumb. Divorced meant desperate. Isolated meant defenseless. But what she didn't know was that this electrician had a lesson in store for her. If a guy can wire an entire house, he can certainly wire a trap. And I had been saving up some serious voltage just for her. The next morning, I was at her doorstep at exactly 7 o'clock. Nothing says friendly neighborhood chat quite like confronting a thief before she's had her morning latte. She answered the door in a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck payment, holding a mug that read, "World's Best Realtor." The rich aroma of overpriced coffee drifted out, probably the kind handpicked by monks, or at least priced like it. "Marcus," she said, dragging my name out like it was contagious. "Morning, Brenda. Nice cable you've got there." Her Botoxed forehead tried to wrinkle, though it didn't quite succeed. I'm sorry." I raised my phone, security footage queued up. 3 a.m. bolt cutters. My driveway. Her face on full display. Ring any bells? She watched herself in the act and then gave me that polished realtor smile, the kind that says trust me while she slips your wallet out of your pocket. "Oh, that," she said smoothly. I was conducting a safety inspection. I almost laughed. A safety inspection with bolt cutters. At 3 in the morning. As HOA president, I have a duty to investigate potential electrical hazards, she replied, not missing a beat. The woman had more brass than a marching band. "So, let me get this straight," I said. "You inspected my cable, by cutting it into pieces." "I was collecting evidence of code violations," she declared with complete confidence. "Evidence that's now plugged into your Tesla," I said. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she replied, straight-faced. "Here's the thing about sociopaths. They'll gaslight you while standing in the flames." But I wasn't just some pushover neighbor anymore. I was a guy with professional-grade security cameras and 22 years of experience wrangling with code enforcement. That afternoon, I walked into the police station with my evidence folder. The desk sergeant perked up the second I mentioned the dollar amount. 300. That's felony territory, buddy. Music to my ears. But then Detective Reynolds showed up, and immediately, something clicked. Same sharp jawline as Brenda. Same smug, condescending smirk. "Mr. Marcus," he said, mangling my name like it was optional. "Neighbor disputes can get messy. You sure you want to escalate this?" "Detective," I shot back, "if someone cut the cables on your police car, would that be escalation or investigation?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His jaw tightened like I'd just insulted his mother. "That's completely different. Look, maybe you folks can work this out without involving the courts." And there it was. Corruption, served with a side of family loyalty. But Detective Reynolds made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was just some blue-collar schmuck who'd roll over at the first sign of authority. While he was stonewalling my theft report, I was already 3 steps ahead. See, during all those months of documenting Brenda's harassment, I'd noticed something odd. Night after night, Brenda's Tesla sat plugged into the community center's external outlet. Every single night. The community center was taxpayer-funded, municipal property. Which meant her little habit wasn't just freeloading, it was theft of public utilities. A whole different flavor of felony. So, I began my surveillance routine. Midnight drives, timestamped photos. The soft click of my camera shutter became my new nightly soundtrack. Week after week, there it was, Princess Tesla leeching power from the public grid. But Brenda wasn't satisfied with blocking my police report. Oh no. 3 days later, violation notices began sprouting across the neighborhood like a plague of bureaucratic locusts. The Patels were cited for non-conforming religious displays, their prayer flags in their own backyard. Jessica across the street got written up for excessive children's recreational materials visible from public areas. Translation: her kid's sidewalk chalk. The message was crystal clear: cross Brenda, and she'd carpet bomb the entire block. That evening, I started knocking on doors. The stories I collected made my stomach twist. Mrs. Patel whispered about threats over cooking odors that might hurt property values. Jessica showed me a showbox stuffed full of violation notices, everything from holiday decorations that didn't match the approved color palette to her kids' play equipment being aesthetic violations. Every single victim's story had common threads. Not white, not wealthy, not willing to grovel. That's when the light bulb went off, pun absolutely intended. This wasn't random harassment. This was systematic discrimination, and the paper trail was longer than Brenda's list of professional ethics violations. That night, I called my ex-wife, Sarah. Say what you will about our marriage, but she was always the strategist. After I unloaded the whole story, she didn't hesitate. "Marcus," she said, "you're thinking like a victim. Think like an electrician. What's that supposed to mean? When you troubleshoot a circuit, what's the first thing you do? Follow the power source." Exactly. Stop chasing symptoms and find the main breaker. She was right. Brenda wasn't just a cable thief. She was running an operation. And systematic operations leave systematic evidence. It was time to trace the circuit all the way back to its source. That trail led me straight down a rabbit hole that would have made Alice dizzy. Brenda had been busier than a one-legged cat in a sandbox, filing 17 separate code violation reports against me in a single month. The musty smell of bureaucratic paperwork filled my nostrils as I dug through city records. Each bogus complaint was more absurd than the last. Operating an unlicensed electrical business, creating neighborhood disturbances through antagonistic behavior. My personal favorite, potential electromagnetic interference with neighborhood Wi-Fi networks. Apparently, my legally installed charging station had evolved into a cyber weapon. But then Lady Luck tossed me a bone. The city inspector assigned to investigate Brenda's nonsense was Tom Valdez, a guy I'd worked alongside on 3 commercial projects. Tom was one of those rare government employees who actually cared about facts more than politics. "Marcus," he said when I called, "I've been waiting for you to reach out. Your neighbor's crazier than a soup sandwich." We met at Mel's Diner on 5th Street. The clatter of silverware against heavy ceramic plates made perfect cover for what felt more like a Cold War intelligence exchange than breakfast. Tom slid a manila folder across the chipped Formica table like it contained state secrets. "Everything Princess Brenda's filed in 6 months," he said, stirring sugar into coffee strong enough to strip paint. "Take a look at the pattern." I opened the folder and my jaw dropped harder than a wrench on concrete. Page after page of complaints, all targeting the same group of people. The Patels, cited for unpermitted religious structures, their prayer flags in their own backyard. Jessica, accused of running an unlicensed childcare facility because her kids played outside. And Mr. Washington, the black veteran down the street, written up for operating an automotive repair business because he changed his own oil. 8 to 9% of her complaints target non-white residents, Tom said flatly. "I've been building a federal discrimination case, but I needed someone with legal standing who wouldn't just roll over and move away." That's when my second light bulb went off, brighter than a 4th of July finale. Tom had been playing the long game, waiting for the right victim to make his case bulletproof. "But wait, there's more," Tom added, grinning like some late-night infomercial host. "I pulled electrical permits for every house in Willowbrook Estates. Guess whose $80,000 Tesla charger was never approved by the city? The irony was so thick you could slice it with bolt cutters. The HOA president who'd been harassing me for properly permitted equipment was running an illegal installation that violated just about every code in the book. While Tom dropped legal bombshells, I showed him my midnight surveillance photos of Brenda stealing electricity from the community center. His eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting 777s. "Public utilities fraud," he whispered. "That's FBI territory. White-collar division eats this kind of thing for breakfast." The beautiful thing about systematic criminals is they never stop at one crime. Brenda wasn't just harassing neighbors. She was orchestrating a full-scale discrimination campaign while committing federal theft, filing false reports, and operating illegal equipment. She'd basically turned Willowbrook Estates into a crime buffet. That evening, I organized a neighborhood potluck at the community center. It's funny, mention free food and the chance to vent about Brenda, and suddenly people came crawling out of the woodwork. The warm aroma of homemade casseroles mingled with the electric anticipation of a community finally ready to fight back. Mrs. Chen showed up carrying her own evidence folder. As it turned out, The quiet retiree had once been a federal prosecutor, and she'd been running her own investigation, quietly building a legal case from the other direction. "Marcus," she said, spreading documents across a folding table, "what you've stumbled into is a textbook civil rights conspiracy. Patent discrimination, abuse of authority, mail fraud, public corruption. In terms your ex-wife might understand, Brenda's looking at 25 to life if we prosecute this properly." The room went dead silent. The only sounds were the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the sharp intake of someone's breath. 25 years, for harassing neighbors and stealing electricity. But Mrs. Chen wasn't finished. She slid another stack of papers across the table. Voting records. She'd analyzed HOA elections dating back 5 years. Voter turnout collapsed, she explained. 68% participation before Brenda. 12% under her reign of terror. She's been systematically suppressing Democratic participation by driving away opposition voters, Mrs. Chen explained. That's federal election interference, on top of everything else. And then came the twist that made my electrician's heart sing. While we were quietly building our federal case, Brenda went and made her biggest mistake yet. That same afternoon, she called in a city inspector to file yet another false report about my so-called dangerous electrical modifications. The inspector who showed up, none other than Tom Valdez. The same Tom who'd been documenting everything. Only this time, he was wearing a wire. Brenda didn't just file a bogus complaint, she put it on record, live, to a government official. In one stroke, she handed us conspiracy charges wrapped in a bow. Tom grinned. Game, set, and match. At that point, we weren't just pushing back, we were building a federal case destined to make headlines. 2 weeks into our evidence-gathering operation, Brenda finally lost the mask. Full psychotic break, burn the village to save it desperation. You could practically smell the acrid stench of panic radiating from her corner mansion as she launched a terror campaign fit for a dictator. First target, the Rodriguez family. Maria had been quietly supporting our neighborhood resistance. So Brenda conjured a fake rental crisis out of thin air. Suddenly, their lease had clerical errors requiring immediate termination. The eviction papers were so freshly printed they were still warm when Maria knocked on my door, tears streaking down her face, clutching her 2 kids like lifelines. 3 days, she whispered. She says we have to be gone by Friday or she'll call the police. Mrs. Chen examined the notice and burst into laughter. Sharp, ruthless laughter, the kind you'd expect from someone who just caught an amateur trying to fake insurance fraud. This document is more fictional than Harry Potter, she said. She's backdating signatures and citing violations that don't exist in any legal universe. But Princess Brenda wasn't done. Next, she filed a property lien against Mrs. Chen's house for unpaid HOA fines, fines that existed only in Brenda's increasingly delusional imagination. Suddenly, a 30-year federal prosecutor was staring at foreclosure over debts that weren't even real. The cruelest blow came Tuesday morning. Brenda called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, reporting the Patels as suspicious foreign nationals operating without documentation. The sound of Mr. Patel's panicked phone calls carried through my kitchen window as he desperately tried to reach the immigration attorney. 20 years of legal residency. A house they owned outright. And now, suddenly, they were under suspicion. She's trying to ethnically cleanse the entire neighborhood, I told Tom during our daily briefing. This isn't harassment anymore. It's domestic terrorism with a real estate license, I told Tom. But the irony was, Brenda's desperation had become our greatest weapon. Every fraudulent document, every false report, every illegal threat, she was creating an evidence trail so clear even a blind prosecutor could follow it. She wasn't just committing crimes, she was practically live-tweeting them. That's when Jake Morrison from the county newspaper started sniffing around. I'd been feeding him strategic leaks for weeks, biding my time until the perfect moment to drop the story. When he called about the IC report, I knew it was showtime. Marcus, Jake said, his voice practically trembling with reporter bloodlust. This story keeps getting bigger. Mind if I really dig into this woman's background? Jake, I told him, when you start excavating Brenda's finances, you're going to need a backhoe. While Brenda was busy committing federal crimes in broad daylight, Mrs. Chen had been following the money like a bloodhound. What she uncovered made Enron look like a neighborhood bake sale. Property records revealed a breathtaking pattern of predatory profiteering. Every family Brenda harassed into selling had accepted well below market value. Every single one. And guess who swooped in with cash purchases through a carousel of cleverly named shell companies? Willowbrook Properties, LLC. Suburban Renewal Holdings. Community Enhancement Ventures. All of them tracing back to our friendly neighborhood sociopath. I could almost feel the smooth edge of justice in my hands as I slid 3 years of property transfer records across to Jake. She's not just a racist, Jake. She's running an ethnic cleansing operation for profit. Jake's investigation blew the doors off. He uncovered the staggering scope of Brenda's empire. 4 to 7 families driven out over 3 years. Average profit per property flip, $85,000. Total theft from our community, $3.8 million. Stolen straight from the equity and dreams of our neighbors. But the nuclear weapon in our evidence arsenal came from the most unexpected place imaginable. Jessica's 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been secretly recording Brenda's public meltdowns, thinking the angry lady was hilarious entertainment. Kids and their phones, right? Except Emma's joke recordings captured something extraordinary, Brenda bragging to another real estate agent about her business model. You overwhelm them with violations until they break. Brenda's voice crackled through Jessica's phone speaker as we gathered in my living room. File enough complaints, they eventually give up and sell cheap. Then you renovate, market to the right demographic, and triple your investment. It's perfectly legal if you're just maintaining community standards. The room went silent, except for the soft hum of my backup recorder capturing every incriminating word. An 8-year-old with an iPhone had just delivered a full confession to federal conspiracy charges. Jake's editor didn't hesitate. He greenlit a 3-part nuclear expose. When do we publish? Jake asked. I looked around at the faces of people who had been terrorized for years. Maria clutching her fraudulent eviction notice, the Patels holding their lawyer's card like a lifeline, Mrs. Chen scanning documents that could strip her of her home. Next week, I said, smiling. Right before the HOA election meeting. Brenda thought she was battling random neighbors. She had no idea she was about to face federal prosecutors, investigative journalists, and a community that had evolved from prey into predators. It was time to hunt the hunter. At dawn the next morning, Mrs. Chen called with a voice that made my coffee go cold. Marcus, my office. Now, bring your security footage and prepare to have your mind blown. When I arrived, her office looked like the aftermath of a hurricane tearing through a law library. Legal documents covered every surface, color-coded highlights everywhere, the sharp scent of permanent marker hanging in the air. Mrs. Chen, normally composed, looked electric. 7 years prosecuting federal crimes, she said without looking up, and I've never seen anything this beautifully criminal. She tapped a clause buried on page 47 of the original HOA charter. The kind of legal fine print that would cure insomnia, a right of first refusal on all property sales within Willowbrook Estates. English, please, I said. She leaned back, eyes gleaming. The original developer kept the right to match any house sale offer. But that right transfers to whoever controls the development's management company. Her finger slid down to another highlighted section. Management company, controlled by Willowbrook Properties, LLC. The blood drained from my face faster than water through a broken pipe. Brenda's shell company. Marcus, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice razor-sharp. Every HOA decision Brenda has made for 3 years has directly benefited her financially. Every violation notice she sent while hiding this conflict of interest. Federal mail fraud. Every harassment campaign designed to force sales. Wire fraud conspiracy. Mrs. Chen pulled out bank records that looked like they'd been printed in hell. The soft rustle of pages was the only sound as she guided me through 3 years of systematic theft. She doesn't just profit from the property flips, Marcus, she said. She gets first right of refusal at below market prices, then flips them through her other shell companies. It's a closed-loop money laundering operation. I counted the transactions with trembling hands. 4 to 7 families driven out. 4 to 7 below-market sales. 4 to 7 times Brenda legally robbed our neighbors while hiding behind HOA authority. How much? I asked, already dreading the answer. Mrs. Chen's calculator clicked like a ticking time bomb. Conservative estimate: $4.2 million stolen from this community over 3 years. The room tilted around me. We had gone from investigating a stolen charging cable to exposing what federal prosecutors would classify as organized racketeering. RICO territory, the kind of case that makes headlines and destroys legacies. But Mrs. Chen wasn't finished. "There's something else," she whispered. Her finger tapped another document. The original development required ongoing environmental monitoring funded by resident fees, $2.3 million collected over 6 years. "Let me guess," I said. "Diverted to Willowbrook Properties, LLC. Zero environmental testing conducted. And if there's industrial contamination spreading through our groundwater." She didn't need to finish. Environmental crimes carry unlimited federal liability, cleanup costs, property damage, health impacts. We could be staring at a $100 million Superfund site with Brenda as the responsible party. The irony struck like electricity through wet copper. Brenda had been so obsessed with squeezing money from families that she'd accidentally created a federal case capable of bankrupting her into the Stone Age. Mrs. Chen leaned back in her chair, surveying the legal carnage scattered across her office. "Marcus, we started investigating a neighborhood bully and uncovered a criminal enterprise that could qualify for federal death penalty charges." I stared at the evidence. 4 to 7 families destroyed. Millions stolen. Environmental crimes that could poison an entire community. Justice felt different now. Heavier. Sharper. Permanent. "What's our next move?" I asked. Mrs. Chen smiled, the kind of smile prosecutors give when handed a full confession. "We call the FBI. Because Brenda Fitzpatrick isn't just going to prison. She's about to become a federal case study in how greed destroys everything it touches." The balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had detonated. Mrs. Chen's home office now looked like a strange hybrid between federal crime headquarters and Grandma's craft room. The rich aroma of Mrs. Chen's legendary Korean coffee blended with a sharp tang of fresh printer ink as she churned out legal documents like a woman possessed. By noon, she had filed formal complaints with more government agencies than I even knew existed. "Here's the beautiful thing about systematic criminals," she said, highlighting passages with the precision of a surgeon. "They create systematic evidence. Every crime Brenda committed left a paper trail that leads straight to federal prison." Tom Valdez arrived next, flashing his city inspector credentials and wearing a grin so wide it looked painted on. "Marcus, my friend, you're about to become the most satisfied customer in municipal history." He spread out 3 years of violation reports like a poker player laying down a royal flush. The soft shuffle of the papers was pure music to my electrician's ears. "Every bogus complaint is documented, catalogued, and ready for prosecution," Tom continued. "She filed 43 false reports against protected residents. And not a single one against the properties she was flipping. Even a blind prosecutor could win this case." Then came Jake Morrison, hauling in enough recording equipment to film a feature-length documentary. "This story's gone viral before I've even published it," he said, adjusting his camera angles. 3 networks won exclusive interviews, and my editors whispering Pulitzer. But the real strategist, the one who stunned the room, was Zoe, my 16-year-old daughter. Apparently, she had inherited her mother's organizational genius and my obsession with electrical precision. She'd built a digital evidence archive so detailed it could make the NSA weep with envy. "Dad, check this out," she said, pulling up her laptop like a general briefing her troops. "I've mapped every harassment incident against demographic data, property values, and social media activity. Brenda targets families within 2 weeks of posting about cultural celebrations or home improvements." The kid had basically created a federal hate crime algorithm. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched my daughter dismantle a criminal empire with nothing more than spreadsheets and sheer teenage determination. While our legal dream team pieced together evidence, I worked on the technical trap that would finish Brenda if she tried stealing again. My replacement charging cable looked identical to the original, but this one carried more surveillance tech than a CIA safe house. GPS tracking, cellular connectivity, current monitoring, automatic police alerts, I explained, holding up the cable like a trophy. "If Princess Brenda touches this thing, half the police department will know her exact location within 60 seconds. The rough texture of the surveillance gear felt solid and strangely satisfying beneath my fingertips. Sometimes the best revenge is handing your enemy exactly what they crave, and then watching as they destroy themselves by taking it. Mrs. Chen had been playing legal chess while the rest of us were still fumbling through checkers. She had already filed court orders freezing every asset Brenda owned, from bank accounts to shell company properties. She can't move money, destroy evidence, or transfer ownership without committing new federal crimes, Mrs. Chen said calmly. How long can you keep her frozen? I asked. Until hell freezes over. Her smile was pure predator, sharp, cold, and merciless. Federal asset freezes are legal quicksand. The harder she struggles, the deeper she sinks. Jake's media strategy was nothing short of psychological warfare. He laid out a 3-part expose designed for maximum emotional punch. Harassment victims first, to build sympathy. Financial fraud second, to spark outrage. And finally, the federal arrests, to deliver the knockout blow. Jake grinned. By the time we're done, Brenda's going to be more famous than she ever dreamed. National poster child for HOA corruption. The community's mobilization was something to behold. Maria Rodriguez had rallied every victim into a coordinated evidence-gathering machine. My garage filled with the warm, comforting aroma of her homemade tamales as neighbors, people who had lived in fear and isolation for years, came together for the first time. We're not just fighting one racist, Maria announced to the packed room. We're proving that communities can fight back against systematic oppression. Mrs. Chen tempered the optimism with a dose of hard truth. Cornered narcissists are dangerous, she warned. Expect vandalism, false police reports, maybe even physical violence. Never confront her alone. I had already transformed my house into a fortress. Motion sensors, reinforced alarms, and enough high-resolution cameras to make even the most paranoid person jealous. The soft blue glow of LED indicators now covered every angle of my property, like watchful eyes in the dark. But our greatest weapon wasn't hardware, it was timing. The HOA election meeting was set for Saturday at 2 p.m. Jake's expose would go live Friday morning, giving the community a full 24 hours to absorb the magnitude of Brenda's crimes before facing her in person. I looked around at our assembled coalition, the mix of neighbors, legal minds, and warriors who'd turned my garage into a war room. For a moment, I felt like a general about to send his troops into battle. Here's what's going to happen, I told them, steadying my voice for the storm ahead. Friday morning, Brenda woke to find her crimes plastered across the front page. By Friday afternoon, federal agents were knocking on doors and asking questions. And by Saturday afternoon, she'd be standing in front of a room full of neighbors who finally knew exactly what she had stolen from them. Zoe glanced up from her laptop, a sly grin tugging at her face. Dad, that's not justice. That's beautiful. She wasn't wrong. Friday morning, Jake's expose slammed into Willowbrook Estates like a legal earthquake, with aftershocks measured in shattered reputations. HOA president accused of running multimillion-dollar ethnic cleansing scheme screamed from doorsteps and news alerts, igniting the neighborhood in glorious chaos. The bitter smell of burned coffee filled kitchens as residents digested their morning brew alongside the details of Brenda's criminal empire. My phone lit up non-stop, buzzing so relentlessly I thought it had short-circuited. Neighbors called to apologize, to share their own horror stories, or simply to confirm that yes, the Tesla-driving sociopath had finally been exposed. But Brenda's reaction wasn't guilt, and it wasn't shame. It was panic. Pure, crystalline panic mixed with the kind of desperation that makes criminals commit spectacularly stupid acts. Her first move was to try canceling the HOA election meeting. She called every board member, shrieking about terrorist threats and neighborhood safety concerns. When that didn't stick, she attempted to move the vote to her own house, because nothing says democracy like forcing residents to cast their ballots under the menacing gaze of your Tesla parked in the driveway. Then Tom Valdez rang me up, his voice bubbling with glee. She's been harassing City Hall since dawn, he laughed. Demanding emergency inspections of your property for unlicensed surveillance operations because you have security cameras on your own property. I nearly dropped the phone. According to Brenda, recording public areas was electronic stalking and an invasion of privacy. She wanted me arrested for documenting her crimes. The irony was so thick you could use it as insulation. A woman running a criminal surveillance racket was accusing me of spying with legal security cameras. But Wednesday afternoon, her spiral escalated straight into federal stupidity. Someone called the fire department, claiming there were suspicious electrical odors coming from my garage. Within minutes, 3 fire trucks screamed down the street, sirens blaring, lights flashing, ready to extinguish a blaze that existed only in Brenda's unraveling imagination. The rough texture of fire hoses being unrolled across my driveway felt oddly satisfying as firefighters inspected my spotless workshop. The chief shook his head, impressed. Cleanest electrical work I've seen in decades. Whoever reported this was either hallucinating or deliberately wasting our time. Thursday delivered a new tactic, witness intimidation disguised as friendly real estate advice. Brenda's cronies began making casual visits to neighbors who had spoken with Jake Morrison. They weren't overtly threatening, just dropping comments about how negative publicity could hurt property values and how some residents might consider relocating before things got messy. But Maria Rodriguez was ready. A soft click from her phone captured the moment one of Brenda's associates suggested she'd be more comfortable living in a culturally appropriate neighborhood. Federal prosecutors have a phrase for that: witness tampering with a hate crime enhancement. Brenda's true masterpiece of stupidity, however, came Thursday night. At 2 a.m., my motion sensors lit up, catching her skulking across my lawn like a bargain bin ninja. Bolt cutters glinted under the streetlights as she crept toward my replacement cable, the one packed with more surveillance tech than a CIA black site. I watched live on my phone as she scanned the house for lights, then raised the cutters like a ceremonial blade. The instant steel bit copper, my system roared to life. BPS tracking activated. Police alerts dispatched. Current monitoring flagged active theft. Motion floods switched on, blasting the yard with blinding light. Brenda froze, illuminated like a vampire caught at sunrise, staring straight into my camera with stolen federal evidence clutched in her hands. Any rational criminal would have dropped everything and bolted. Instead, she smiled. Not a slip of panic. Not embarrassment. A cold, calculated grin that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't care who's watching." Dragging my cable with the arrogance of someone who'd gotten away with crime for years, she vanished into her garage. But that smile sealed her fate. It wasn't just theft. It was proof of premeditation, repeat offense intent, and outright contempt for law enforcement. And while Brenda was busy starring in her own incriminating livestream, Mrs. Chen was executing a parallel strike. She had spent the evening serving legal papers to every shell company, freezing every bank account, and filing emergency injunctions that would turn Brenda's morning into a legal minefield. Police simply followed the GPS trail straight to Brenda's garage, where they found her Tesla charging smugly off my stolen cable. The metallic snap of handcuffs rang through the neighborhood like a symphony of justice. Officer Martinez said evenly, "You're under arrest for grand theft, breaking and entering, and violating federal surveillance orders. You have the right to remain silent," which, given the evidence, seems like excellent advice. As they loaded our disgraced HOA president into the patrol car, something remarkable happened. Neighbors stepped out of their houses, not to gawk, but to cheer. The Patels clapped from their porch. Maria Rodriguez raised her phone like a victory banner. Jessica and her kids waved as if a parade had just passed. Even old Mr. Washington applauded from his doorstep. Tomorrow's election wasn't going to need a candidate, it was going to need a celebration. Friday morning delivered a GPS tracking update that made my electrician's soul practically glow. The stolen cable wasn't just sitting in Brenda's garage, it was charging her Tesla, siphoning electricity in real time while broadcasting her location to half the police departments in the state. But Brenda wasn't ready to let go of her empire. Cornered sociopaths don't just burn bridges, they napalm entire civilizations. Her first move was hiring Harold Peaton III, a criminal defense attorney who billed more per hour than most people earned in a month. By noon, he was holding a press conference on Brenda's front lawn, his silver hair polished to a gleam as he spun lies with the confidence of a seasoned politician. "My client is a victim of a coordinated character assassination," Peaton declared, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had defended mob bosses and crooked officials. These false accusations represent a dangerous precedent, where effective community leadership is criminalized by disgruntled residents. The stench of pure nonsense was so strong I could taste it through the television screen. Jake Morrison was live tweeting from across the street. Watching someone call documented federal crimes character assassination is like watching flat earthers explain gravity. But Brenda's plan wasn't limited to denial, it was mutually assured destruction. If she was going down, she was determined to drag us all with her. By Friday afternoon, a lawsuit landed that could only be described as weapon-grade legal insanity. Brenda was suing me, Mrs. Chen, Tom Valdez, Jake Morrison, and, somehow, even my daughter Zoe. The charges: conspiracy to commit defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the crown jewel of irony, racketeering through coordinated harassment. The woman who had spent years running an actual racketeering operation was now accusing us of racketeering for documenting her racketeering. The cognitive dissonance could have powered a small city. Friday evening brought a display of desperate evidence destruction that would have made Nixon proud. Security cameras caught Brenda making repeated trips to her garage with boxes of documents, feeding them into what sounded like an industrial-grade shredder. The mechanical whine of obliteration echoed across the neighborhood as 3 years of criminal records were reduced to overpriced confetti. Unfortunately for her, shredding evidence during a federal investigation is like dousing a fire with gasoline. It only makes the flames roar brighter. Mrs. Chen called with an update that sealed my weekend with perfection. Federal marshals had just executed asset seizure warrants on everything Brenda owned. They were treating the case as a full-blown RICO prosecution, organized crime, money laundering, civil rights conspiracy. How much damage are we talking? I asked. $12.7 million in frozen assets, she replied. Every house, every bank account, every luxury handbag. Brenda was now officially poorer than a college freshman and facing more federal charges than the average mafia boss. Saturday morning delivered Brenda's crowning act of criminal stupidity. Security footage showed her loading her Tesla with suitcases, stacks of cash, and what looked suspiciously like emergency travel documents. Our self-appointed HOA princess was trying to flee the country. The delicious irony. My stolen charging cable was still plugged into her car, broadcasting her location with the precision of a GPS ankle monitor. State police intercepted her 40 miles outside of town, following the signal straight to a federal fugitive hauling enough cash to bankroll a small revolution. The rough texture of highway asphalt likely felt instructive as she was cuffed and booked for flight to avoid prosecution. But here's the twist that made everything shift from merely satisfying to absolutely perfect. While Brenda was being arrested on Interstate 85, federal agents were executing simultaneous search warrants across all her properties. What investigators found in Brenda's home office safe made prosecutors literally applaud. Hidden behind her wall of real estate awards were meticulous spreadsheets detailing harassment campaigns organized by racial demographics. There were target acquisition lists ranking families by deportation probability and cultural assimilation resistance, along with financial projections for neighborhood improvement through strategic demographic enforcement. She hadn't just been corrupt. She had built a systematic ethnic cleansing business plan, complete with profit margins, success metrics, and expansion strategies for other communities. The soft rustle of evidence bags being sealed was the most beautiful sound I'd heard since my divorce papers were signed. Every racist calculation, every fraudulent scheme, every federal crime, documented in her own handwriting. By Saturday afternoon, federal prosecutors had more than enough to charge Brenda under the jurisdiction of 4 separate agencies: racketeering with the FBI, environmental fraud with the EPA, civil rights violations with HUD, and tax evasion with the IRS. Watching agents carry bankers' boxes out of her mansion, I could practically taste the air. It smelled like justice, fresh and undeniable. Neighbors weren't gathering at the community center for an election anymore. This was a celebration. We didn't need to campaign for a new HOA president. What we needed was to figure out how to rebuild a community that one woman's greed had tried to systematically destroy. The neighborhood's electrical system was finally properly grounded, and so was our spirit. By 2 p.m. that Saturday, the community center was packed like a stadium during the World Series. 49 of 52 households crammed into a space designed for 30. The thick aroma of Nova's sweat mingled with Jessica's stress-baked cookies as residents who had lived in fear for years finally gathered to witness their oppressor's downfall. Jake Morrison had his camera crew set up like he was documenting a revolution. Tom Valdez leaned against the back wall, wearing his city inspector badge like it was a row of military ribbons. Mrs. Chen sat front and center with a briefcase containing enough evidence to topple entire governments. The guest of honor, of course, was nowhere to be found. Brenda Fitzpatrick was currently enjoying the latest in orange jumpsuit fashion at the county jail, where her Tesla's intimidation factor had been replaced by the musical rhythm of slamming cell doors. And me? I stood at the front of the packed room, feeling the charge in the air. 3 months of rage, fear, and frustration were about to find their release. The soft murmur of conversation cut off like someone had flipped a power switch, leaving the room in heavy silence as 49 households prepared to hear truths that would change everything. 3 months ago, someone stole my charging cable, I began, my voice carrying across the room. And today, we're here to discuss how that theft exposed a $13 million criminal enterprise that has been systematically destroying our community. The projector's blue glow lit up the room as GPS tracking data appeared, showing the cable's journey from my driveway to Brenda's garage, and finally into her Tesla. Real-time evidence of grand theft, broadcasting her location like a criminal GPS ankle monitor. But this was never about a cable, I continued, clicking to the next slide, financial records that made several people gasp audibly. This was about a woman who turned harassment into a business model. Mrs. Chen rose from her seat with the authority of a federal prosecutor stepping before the Supreme Court. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had spent 30 years putting criminals behind bars. "What you're about to see," she announced, opening her briefcase with ceremonial precision, "is the most systematic civil rights violation I've encountered in 3 decades of federal prosecution." The temperature in the room seemed to drop as she displayed Brenda's harassment statistics. 8 to 9% of complaints targeted non-white residents. 4 to 7 families had been driven from their homes. And not a single legitimate violation was ever found in the targeted properties. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Chen's voice rose like thunder, "you didn't just have a bad neighbor. You were victims of organized ethnic cleansing disguised as HOA enforcement." The sharp intake of breath from 49 people sounded like wind rushing through broken windows. Maria Rodriguez stood up, her hands trembling with 3 years of suppressed fury. "She tried to steal our children's home with fake papers," she said, her voice cracking before hardening like steel being forged. "She called immigration on citizens. She turned our paradise into a prison because we had the audacity to exist while not being white." Mr. Patel rose next, with the dignity of someone who had survived true oppression. His elderly voice carried through the room like a judge delivering a verdict. "For 20 years we have called this place home. One woman's hatred nearly stole that from us. But hatred did not win. The metallic taste of justice seemed to linger in the air as neighbor after neighbor stood, one by one, to share their stories. Each testimony was another nail in Brenda's legal coffin, another federal charge adding years to her inevitable sentence. But the nuclear moment came when Mrs. Chen revealed what agents had discovered in Brenda's private safe. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the packed room, Brenda Fitzpatrick kept detailed records of her crimes. The projector flickered to life, displaying spreadsheets so meticulously designed they made genocide look like an organized business plan. Harassment campaigns divided by racial demographics. Property acquisition targets ranked by deportation probability. Financial projections predicting neighborhood purification through calculated enforcement. The silence was so absolute that the faint hum of the fluorescent lights became deafening. 49 people sat frozen, staring at documented proof that their neighbor had built a systematically racist criminal empire for profit. Then Jake Morrison stepped forward, microphone in hand, delivering the final blow like a war correspondent announcing victory. "Federal prosecutors are treating this as the largest HOA racketeering case in American history," he declared. "Charges include RICO conspiracy, civil rights violations, environmental fraud, and tax evasion. Brenda Fitzpatrick is facing life in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The eruption of applause could have powered the entire neighborhood. It was the sound of pure justice colliding with the primal roar of people who had lived in fear for years and were finally breathing free. But I wasn't finished. Standing before my neighbors, feeling the electric satisfaction of a perfect circuit finally closing, I delivered the line that would later be quoted in every national news story about the case. Brenda thought she could steal our community one charging cable at a time, I said, my voice rising over the cheers. Instead, she handed us the evidence to steal her freedom, one federal charge at a time. The standing ovation that followed rattled the walls and shook the foundation. Justice wasn't just served, it was electrified. 6 months later, watching Brenda Fitzpatrick shuffle into federal court in an orange jumpsuit felt like seeing electricity finally flow through a properly grounded circuit. Judge Patterson's gavel cracked through the room like thunder as he delivered her fate: 25 years in federal prison, $4.8 million restitution, and a lifetime ban from any community leadership role. Mrs. Fitzpatrick, the judge declared, his voice weighted with constitutional authority, your systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing, disguised as civic duty, represents a betrayal of everything American communities stand for. You didn't just commit crimes, you attacked the soul of democracy itself. The words landed heavy, but they carried sweetness too. 4 to 7 families sat in that courtroom, the same families she had tormented, and watched justice finally catch up with her. Jake Morrison's Pulitzer-winning exposé had turned our neighborhood battle into a national movement, sparking similar investigations in a dozen states. But the real transformation was here at home, where a community once fractured by hatred was being rewired into something extraordinary, a true democracy. The civil settlement provided $2.3 million for affected families. And then we made the decision that would have made Brenda's head explode. We pooled every dollar into community improvement. Because the best revenge isn't wealth, it's proving that diversity builds prosperity. Our first project was a solar-powered EV charging station at the community center, free for all residents and fueled by clean energy that would make environmentalists weep with joy. The soft hum of cars charging became the new soundtrack of Willowbrook, replacing the toxic silence fear had left behind. Zoe, my daughter, who had helped expose Brenda's empire with her razor-sharp teenage precision, won the National Civil Rights Essay Competition. Her entry, How a Stolen Charging Cable Exposed American Fascism, earned her early admission to Harvard Law School with a full scholarship. Dad, she told me one Saturday during our weekend wiring workshop, you didn't just get your property back. You showed me that ordinary people can rewire systems that feel too powerful to change. The rough texture of electrical wire felt different in my hands after that. It wasn't just copper and insulation anymore. It was possibility, connection, renewal. Teaching Zoe to wire circuits became teaching her to wire communities. And Mrs. Chen? She transformed her so-called retirement into a civil rights empire, founding the Willowbrook Legal Defense Fund to provide free legal aid for communities facing systemic harassment. Her home office became mission control for a network that now stretched across 37 states. She would smile and say, Marcus. During our monthly strategy meetings, Brenda once weaponized the law against vulnerable families. Now, we've reforged the law into armor for justice. The Rodriguez family purchased Brenda's foreclosed mansion at auction and transformed her monument to hatred into the Willowbrook Cultural Center. Today, the rich aroma of Maria's cooking classes fills halls where racist scheming once festered, proof that love grows strongest in soil cleared of toxic weeds. Tom Valdez's promotion to chief building inspector sparked a quiet revolution in municipal enforcement. His pattern recognition protocol for detecting systemic harassment has since been adopted nationwide, creating an early warning system against future neighborhood dictators. But the deepest transformation wasn't institutional, it was personal. My bond with Zoe grew stronger through shared activism. My connection with neighbors evolved from fearful isolation into genuine friendship. Even my dating life shifted. Turns out, Jessica thinks men who fight fascism are unexpectedly attractive. Standing in the community garden that now blooms where Brenda's house once cast its shadow, I watched the Patels teaching children traditional dances while Mr. Washington showed teenagers how to change oil. It struck me then, we hadn't just taken down a criminal. We had built a template for real democracy. The annual Willowbrook Unity Festival has become a pilgrimage for communities battling systemic oppression. This year's event raised $200,000 for the Charging Cable Scholarship Fund, proof that sometimes the smallest stolen object can power the biggest change. Children's laughter now echoes in the languages Brenda once tried to silence. The smell of diverse meals mingles with the sawdust of workshop benches, as neighbors build both furniture and friendships. The texture of community feels different when it's chosen rather than enforced. What's your neighborhood nightmare? I asked, looking straight into Jake's documentary camera. Share your HOA horror story in the comments. Because if systemic harassment is poisoning your community, you don't have to fight alone. Document everything. Build coalitions. And never forget, justice isn't about winning. It's about wiring communities for connection instead of control. Subscribe if you believe ordinary people can short-circuit oppression. I smiled then, thinking of what was next. Because next week, I promised, I'm telling you about the city councilman who tried to steal our solar panels and how we turned his corruption into clean energy for everyone. Sometimes the most beautiful revenge is building something that makes hatred impossible.